Hi, this is Amit. Today's live stream is about weak squares, weak pawns, and strong knights. To understand chess strategy, positional play, and ideas, we are going to analyze the game played between Mattison and Nimzowitsch in the year 1929. So, white played d4, Nimzowitsch played knight to f6, c4, e6, and now white played knight to c3. d5 is also correct, c5 is also correct in this position, and even b6 can be played definitely. Nimzowitsch played bishop to b4, and this is the Nimzo Indian defense. So Nimzowitsch played the Nimzo Indian defense. White played knight to f3. You can play castle, you can play d5, you can even play b6, which is a kind of a hybrid Nimzo Indian and Queen's Indian. So definitely black can play pawn to c5 and stay into Nimzo Indian. But in game, Nimzowitsch played bishop into c3 check, b into c3 is giving up his bishop, but then you have a better pawn structure. d6, white played queen to c2 in order to play pawn to e4, which increases the grip on center. Queen to e7, such that if white plays pawn to e4, in that case he can play pawn to e5 and challenge the center. So here, instead of playing pawn to e4, white played bishop to a3, and the idea behind this pin is to stop pawn to e5. So if black plays e5, white can capture and now will not be able to recapture it with the d pawn, right? Because if black plays d into e5, white can simply capture our queen. So that's why it is not possible. And in order to stop his c5 and enable black to play pawn to e5, black should play pawn to c5. Fix the black's weakness of double pawns. White played pawn to g3. And now black played pawn to b6. Bishop to g2 removes the potential defender of this c4 pawn. Bishop to b7. So white played short castle. And now white played knight to h4. Black played bishop into g2, king into g2. Nimzowitsch played queen to b7 check, king to g1, queen to a6. So in order to defend that, white played queen to b3, black played knight to c6, white played rook f2 d1 and knight to a5. So now you are attacking the queen and you are increasing the attack on the weak pawn. Queen to b5, queen into b5, c into b5, knight to c4. White got rid of a double pawn, that is fine. But now black's knight is on a weak square. Okay, so now we have a strong knight. You are forcing him to go back on c1, a6. Yeah, white plays b into a6, rook into a6, and now you have an open a file. And white has h is a weak pawn, c3 is a weak pawn, c4 is a weak square. We can double up over a file. White played d into c5, so b into c5. White played knight to g2. Nimzowitsch played knight d5 and he is attacking the weak c3 pawn, which is an isolated pawn. Rook to d3. Rook f to a8. We have a strong knights on c4 and d5. And c3 is an isolated pawn. a2 is again an isolated pawn. So we have double up the rook to attack the a2 pawn. White played pawn to e4 in order to kick your knight, which is on a strong square. So here black should play knight to e5. And white resigned in this position, right? So either he can come on d2 or he can come on d1. So if white plays rook to d2, in that case we can play knight to f3 check. It's a fork and you're going to win the rook in that case. If white plays rook to d1, you're going to win the first pawn. You're going to win the second pawn, which is on a2, right? You're attacking the rook. So if white saves the rook by playing rook to f1, rook into a2 is coming. Rook into a2, and even e4 pawn is under attack. If white plays pawn to f3, remember we are already 2 pawn up, but this can be disastrous for him, because here you can play knight to e2 check, king has to move, and then you can simply play rook to a1 and you can win the bishop, which is on c1 square, because if the bishop moves, then rook into f1 is coming. So that's it for the day, my friends. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.